Russia already showed its willingness to let the United States act in Venezuela at its own discretion 7 years ago, in exchange for Washington giving the Kremlin complete freedom of action in Ukraine. But after the fall of Nicolas Maduro's regime in Venezuela, Ukraine can breathe a sigh of relief because this operation by Trump played into Kyiv's hands. Now hidden details have emerged about how Trump outplayed Vladimir Putin. The United States president has already demanded that the new president of Venezuela expel Russian agents and mercenaries from Venezuela, as well as shut down the production of drones for the Russian army. Yes, that's right. Venezuela was one of the centers for creating deadly weapons for the Russian occupiers. While Trump focuses on Venezuela, Ukraine is working with Europeans on security guarantees as peace talks are on hold. In this episode, I'll answer the most common questions, for example, whether there was a deal between Trump and Putin regarding Venezuela and Ukraine. How does Maduro's seizure affect Russia's war against Ukraine? Can what happened in Caracas be called a personal failure for Vladimir Putin? Were the United States legally right? And what should we expect next in the geopolitical dimension? Let's figure out these questions together. My name is Pechiy. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like this episode, and leave any comment under this video. This really helps a lot in promoting the content on YouTube. I would appreciate your comments, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechiy News. The link is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. So, the New York Times suddenly comes out with an article claiming that Russia was already willing 7 years ago to let the United States act in Venezuela as it saw fit, in exchange for Washington giving the Kremlin complete freedom of action in Ukraine. Allegedly, this is supported by testimony in the United States Congress. Fiona Hill is a former advisor on Russia and Europe at the National Security Council during Donald Trump's first administration. Now I'll quote the New York Times. Memories of this informal proposal have resurfaced amid Moscow's mixed reaction to United States involvement in Venezuelan affairs and the rising tensions between Washington and Caracas. According to Fiona Hill, the Kremlin actively promoted the idea of a kind of exchange of spheres of influence through the media and its commentators. The Russians made it very clear that they wanted to make some kind of strange barter between Venezuela and Ukraine, Fiona Hill said during congressional hearings in October 2019. That is, more than 2 years before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. According to her, the essence of the proposal was that if the United States insists on its right to control its own sphere of influence, then it should agree to Russia having the same right regarding Ukraine. Do you want us to get out of your yard? That's how they put it, but you're also in our yard. In Ukraine, Hill paraphrased the Kremlin's position. She noted that she personally went to Moscow to reject this idea. The proposal emerged amid a sharp escalation in relations between the United States and Venezuela, when Russia sent about 100 troops and new weapons to the country to support President Nicolas Maduro's regime. Maduro's fall became another blow to the regime supported by Moscow. Earlier, just over a year ago, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad was also overthrown. And here, the first question arises. Did Russia secretly agree with the Americans on the operation in Venezuela, and will this negatively affect the peace talks in Ukraine? I don't think so, and I'll explain why. Venezuela is a country with the largest oil reserves in the world. It's simply a jewel among the regimes that Russia has controlled ever since the Russians started befriending Maduro's regime. They destroyed oil production in Venezuela from 3.5 million barrels per day to 500,000 1 million barrels, which is more than 3 times less. They simply collapsed oil production in Venezuela. At the same time, with modern technology, Venezuela can easily produce more than 10 million barrels per day, which is as much as Russia produces in a day. So in the future, such an increase in production will crash the price of black gold. Let's be clear, just 3 million more barrels per day from Venezuela, an organization of the petroleum exporting countries member with the right to produce, would destroy Russia's economy. This would push Russians out of the oil market entirely. Don't forget that China and India also buy Venezuelan oil. If Venezuela produces much more, they can stop buying Russian oil. So Venezuela was a strategically important country for Russians, and Russians are definitely shocked by what happened. And this humiliation hurts even more because of how easily it all happened. That's why I assume that Russia will still try to win back Venezuela somehow, and for the Americans and our Ukrainian negotiating position, this is definitely only beneficial, because Trump won't like it if Russia bites back and tries to win back Caracas. And there's one more question that's hanging in the air and sometimes comes up in the comments under my videos. What does Ukraine get out of Maduro's regime falling? Like, why should we care about what's happening there in Venezuela? And here the line is very thin. Unlike the Cuban regime, Maduro hasn't sent mercenaries to fight against Ukraine. But Venezuela was a center for the production of Shahed drones for Russia. There were huge assembly workshops operating in Venezuela, with separate boards, units, processors, and so on and so on. All of this was being put together there. Venezuela was not under such strict sanctions as, for example, Russia or Iran, plus the labor force that was very cheap. In the criminal mentality of Russians, this is actually the perfect place to assemble weapons, all of this to later kill Ukrainians. All these parts were loaded onto passenger planes, the frequency of which sharply increased with the start of this drone cooperation. Look at the charts and you'll see that for some reason suddenly planes started flying very actively from Russia to Venezuela, so over time the number of drones the Russians have may decrease, because now this production might collapse. Is this a military defeat for Russia? Specifically, is the operation in Venezuela a Kremlin defeat? Let's consider that. This is, without a doubt, a defeat for Putin personally, for Russia as a whole, and for their weapons, an unexpected and humiliating defeat. There are other aspects beyond oil and Shaheds. Wagner private military company fighters have served as Nicolas Maduro's personal bodyguards since 2019. Russia has supplied Venezuela with a huge amount of air defense systems, at least what is officially known as 2 S-300 systems, 44 Buk systems, S-125 systems, and so on. Also, 14 Su-30 aircraft were delivered and their Tu-160S flew there. And let me remind you that Russia presented the landing of strategic aviation in Caracas as a rock-solid security guarantee. Like, look, we even sent strategic aviation to Venezuela, so don't anyone even think about attacking them. Plus, there were helicopters and thousands of Russians who managed all of this. And further, in the last few months, the Kremlin has been actively transferring troops and drones to Venezuela. A significant number of Russian Il-76 cargo planes were making flights to deliver first-person view drones, specialists, and so on. And all of this was destroyed by the Americans in half an hour. Pete Hegseth is already openly laughing at the Russians. Yesterday he asked, where was the much-praised Russian air defense? It just didn't work. The same thing happened when Bashar Assad fled from Syria, and the same thing happened with Iran. In June, during the 12-day war, Iran stubbornly accused Russia of betraying them. They said, listen, we signed some kind of strategic partnership with you. So where is the help? And in this whole situation, the question arises, why have such an ally? Why have Russia as an ally? Well, let's touch on the most difficult question, both legally and morally. Are the United States of America right in capturing Maduro? And is there an analogy here with the Russian invasion of Ukraine? Because this is exactly the argument that Russians are spreading right now, saying it's the same thing, but there are no analogies here. The United States is morally and legally right. Since 2002, there was a brutal criminal dictatorship in Venezuela under Russian control, meaning this nightmare lasted for 24 years. And if you look at the charges brought against Nicolas Maduro in the United States, you'll see that they cover exactly 25 years of his political activity. Out of Venezuela's population of 28 million, 8 million have left the country during Nicolas Maduro's rule. That says something. People in Venezuela literally live in poverty, even though they have huge reserves of heavy oil, the largest in the world, but that's not all. It was the Russian Federal Security Service and Cuban intelligence services that taught and trained Maduro's regime how to deal with dissenters. And there are still surprises ahead for us when the United States starts publishing evidence of Maduro's and the Russians' connections with the Sun cartel. And in the end, the United States announced a reward as part of an actual criminal case. So from a legal standpoint, everything here is correct. And there was no military operation against the population. The operation was conducted only against the leader of the regime, Nicolas Maduro. And when he was captured, the operation ended. That's all. So, Comparing this to Russia's war against Ukraine is pointless. And to claim, as Russians are now claiming, that from this moment international law was destroyed. Yes, international law was destroyed. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, seized Crimea, and started the Donbass war, they claimed, we're not there, it's just little green men. Well, that's when international law died, it disappeared from the world. Not now, when Trump captured Nicolas Maduro. And it's very strange when some protests even appear in Europe on this topic, like how could they capture Maduro? Well, here's a person who is really involved in a dictatorship, so apparently that's the only fate that awaits him. I would like the exact same thing to happen to Vladimir Putin, but unfortunately that's definitely not going to happen anytime soon. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like if you found this episode useful or the information interesting. You can support the work of this YouTube channel financially with any donation or subscription using the links and details provided. In the description of this video it says support the channel Alexei Pechiy. Choose any format that is convenient for you. I will be grateful for any support from you. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye everyone.